We open to a Bajoran talking about the prophets and primal energy while looking at posters of Voyager. His computer screen shows images of Chakotay, B'Elanna and Tuvok in reference to a Maquis ship. Is it time? Are we finally having a Maquis episode after basically forgetting all about them for years? Prophets be praised. Over on Voyager, marriage seems to have renewed Paris's interest in being a decent human being. So much so that he's brought his new wife flowers and is taking her on a date to the holodeck. Learning that the date is an old movie theatre playing a sci-fi flick, all things that Paris loves, takes the shine off it slightly, though not as much as discovering there's a Bajoran crew member at the front in a coma. The doc's not sure what's causing it, but there is something going on in his brain despite the lack of physical activity. Chakotay goes off to check what the guy was doing recently to see if there might be something capable of causing this. Tuvok's trying to figure it out as well, investigating where it happened. We know the guy's not been like this for long, as Paris spoke to him not 15 minutes before he and B'Elanna arrived. That should help narrow things down, at least. We can't even blame the holodeck itself, according to Kim, as the often dogshit safety protocols were actually working for once. A call from Janeway brings Tuvok to sickbay, where we learn some disturbing news. While he looks fine, the guy in the coma has small skull fractures and some bruising on his shoulder. In short, somebody attacked the lad, and it's up to Tuvok to find the responsible party. To the victim's quarters we go, only to find that somebody got here first. Suspect 1 is Maquis from the looks of the pin on her collar, and is a friend of the victim. She says she's in here finding a book to read to him in the hopes of making a connection through the coma, and Suspect 1 was on duty in engineering when the victim took his nasty knock on the bonce, something B'Elanna can apparently back up. It seems airtight, but Tuvok's still suspicious. Chakotay says somebody's been fucking with the holodeck logs, and Tuvok makes Suspect 1 known to Chakotay and Janeway, apparently choosing to ignore that she has an alibi. Chakotay and her go way back, and he's disinclined to believe that she could be responsible. He goes off to check other sensors, leaving Janeway to ask Tuvok why he singled her out. In a distinctly un-Tuvok response, he says it's something bordering on a hunch. That's very odd, as Vulcans don't tend to have such intuitions. The only gut feeling Tuvok's ever experienced has been after Neelix's cooking. Janeway's confused, but is willing to leave him to do his job in whatever way he thinks will be the most effective. He'd best do it quickly. Suspect 1 sends another crew member into some Jeffries tubes to check a problem. All standard practice, but it doesn't generally end with the lights going off and the crew member in question being chased. By someone in a yellow uniform, no less, just like the jacket Suspect 1 wears. The result is the same as our first victim, and second victim joins him in the sickbay. Same fractures and bruising, says the doc, same odd brain activity. Suspect 1 was the person who discovered him, apparently, so we'd best have a word with her. Which is going to be a problem. We're up to 5 victims now, from the looks of things, and they all have one thing in common, other than their symptoms. They're all Maquis. Chakotay wonders if things are truly as smooth as they look between Starfleet and Maquis. There's been no real shit between them since Voyager's favourite murder boy off the Starfleet guy, and even that had other factors involved, but who knows what bubbles under the surface. Tuvok, the head of security, says whoever's doing this must have access to the security systems, but we don't know anything beyond that. Given the link between the victims, Chakotay has gathered the rest of the Maquis in the mess hall to warn them. One of them is our old friend Chatty Blue Lad, originally from Season 1, but last seen as a member of the Hazard team in the video game we played last season. Either getting shot at didn't agree with him, or he's covering someone's holiday as he's back in regular uniform. He's got plenty to say though, especially when Chakotay tells them they should report anything suspicious to Tuvok. Hardly surprising really, given that Tuvok was a spy on their ship, but B'Elanna defends him. Chakotay's a little more non-committal on the topic, saying only that they shouldn't give in to paranoia, then telling them to stay in pairs and carry a gun. Bit of a mixed message. Some science bollocks on the holodeck turns up a result though. We now have the rough height and weight of whoever fucked up the original victim. Unfortunately, it describes much of the crew, but at least it's a start. The investigation continues, and Tuvok has expanded it to the last batch of letters from the Alpha Quadrant for the crew. Kim's not impressed at having his mail read, but all of this kicked off after receiving the last transmission, so Tuvok thinks it could be relevant. And he's got a fair point. One of Kim's cousins was killed by the Maquis some years ago. While not news to Kim, it was referenced in his latest letter, and Tuvok thinks it might have provided provocation. Personally, I'd have expected Kim to be more pissed off about his dead cousin already having more of a backstory than he does, but explains that all of this was many years ago and he doesn't blame anybody for it. The interview ends and the doc calls Tuvok down to sickbay. Good news, the original victim is awake and able to talk. Bad news, he doesn't know a bloody thing. The last memory he has is of working on the holodeck, but recalls nothing about the attack. Elsewhere, Chakotay and his escort discover Chatty Blue Lad walking around alone. His partner, B'Elanna, decided she was fine on her own, according to him, and buggered off to work in Seven's cargo bay. Chakotay gives his escort to Chatty Blue Lad and goes alone to find her, which feels like quite the choice when all three of them could have gone, but let's ignore that for now. He finds her in the same state as the other victims, but at least Tuvok's there to lend a hand. That's a bit weird though, isn't it? Tuvok being in the place where B'Elanna got attacked. And now he's talking about it being a holy time and attacking Chakotay. Chakotay tries to get a call off to security, which feels very optimistic given who's in charge of that, before Tuvok does psychic shenanigans to him. Janeway's put the entire ship in everything's fucked mode, meaning that anybody who isn't essential is locked in their quarters and guards are all over the place. Some more of the victims are back on their feet and with seemingly no ill effects. Tuvok still hasn't found who's doing this, and he's getting pissed off about it too. Janeway tells him to get a decent night's sleep so he can return to the problem refreshed. Meditation doesn't prove to be quite as calming as it should be. Shots of the victims flash before him, all filmed with a "this is in his head" filter, just in case you're not paying attention. The one of Chakotay defending himself causes him to check, revealing a bruise. And now he's hallucinating to boot. The Bajoran lad from the start of the episode tells him to resist his doubts, but obviously isn't there when Tuvok turns around. Whatever it is, he's fighting it now. He returns to the holodeck where Kim and Janeway are working on the image of whoever attacked the original victim to try and refine the quality. They're surprised to see him, but even more surprised to hear Tuvok ask the computer to clarify where he was at the time of the attack. The data's locked, but he has the key, and the computer tells those gathered that Tuvok was in the holodeck. He sees the Bajoran again and pulls his gun until the hallucination buggers off, then tells Janeway that he must be responsible for all of this despite having no memory of it, and that he should be locked up until we figure it all out. That doesn't mean we can't have a chat though, and he yields some useful data. He can see a Bajoran lad, but it's not anybody from the crew. He also received a letter of his own from home in the last transmission, but didn't think to check it for anything dodgy like he did with Kim. Sounds like a plan, so we go off to do just that along with a newly conscious Chakotay. The letter from Tuvok's son had another signal in it, one that Seven says is designed to plug into Vulcan brains. Chakotay recognizes the guy and says he was a Vedek, basically a Bajoran priest, but with some politician thrown in too, due to the importance Bajorans place on religion. He was a supporter of the Maquis, but was disowned by them for fucking about with mind control to grow their numbers. The rejection wasn't taken well, and he said he'd carry on fighting no matter what it took. That ties in with Tuvok's experience. He met the guy while undercover, though doesn't remember much else. Perhaps that's intentional, says Janeway, and we have another flashback sequence. This one is of Tuvok tied up, but he's struggling to remember the rest. Janeway offers to help him meditate, which, yeah, alright then, let's see where you're going with this. The answer is into the cell, which seems like a hell of a choice. Maybe there aren't any chairs on the outside and Janeway wanted to sit. The meditation is a bit of a mixed bag. Okay, it lets him remember being captured and programmed by the Bajoran Vedek, but it also triggers the rest of the program. He calls Chakotay and issues a coded command, still having a comm badge for some reason, despite being in the brig. Bit odd as they removed Paris's in 30 days and Suda's in Meld, but let's ignore that for now. Chakotay's flashy neck gizmo, standard issue for the victims of Tuvok so that the doc can keep an eye on them, shows something weird going on. The doc tries calling him and receives no response, but that's fine because he's just walked into sickbay. Slight problem though, he disables the doc and poops yellow at Paris before issuing the same commands that he received from Tuvok to B'Elanna. Looks like that Maquis mutiny Tuvok planned for a few years ago might have been more prescient than we gave it credit for. Takeover of the bridge proves to be a swift affair, possibly because only one of the people currently up there has a name. An alert sounds as Janeway is trying to get more information from Tuvok in between his arguments with hallucinations. She's stopped long before she can get to the bridge and guided back into the brig by Chakotay, who says the Maquis is reborn and has taken control of her ship. I'm not endorsing mind control, but you've got to admit that this whole thing has been very effective. The fact that they're decades away from the Alpha Quadrant doesn't seem to have factored into the programming Tuvok has passed on. All that matters is the Maquis still exists. Speaking of Tuvok, it looks like he's lost his mental fight and joined Chakotay. That's a mixed bag for Chakotay, as while he needs Tuvok to psychic shenanigan the Maquis who haven't been programmed yet, he also can't fully trust Tuvok. He was a Federation spy, after all. There's one way to clear that up. Janeway's brought in and Tuvok's given a gun set to kill. It's a test, of course, and the gun mispoops when he presses the trigger, but is Tuvok playing along and secretly knew that? Chakotay thinks not, and Janeway is wheeled back to the brig. He also dismisses his guard, which is quite the choice. Still, I'm sure this is all above board, and Tuvok isn't just waiting for the chance to get him alone. In a surprising turn of events, it wasn't above board, and Tuvok was just waiting for the chance to get him alone. We've arrived at a habitable planet, so the Maquis can dump all of the Starfleet crew onto it. B'Elanna reports an attempted breakout by her presumably now ex-husband and Kim, but they're trapped behind force fields, so it's all good. Chakotay's changed his mind, though, and we're not going to teleport the Starfleet crew away after all. B'Elanna's confused and, after smelling something's off, reaches for her gun. She's beaten to it by Chakotay and Tuvok, who retake control of the bridge. The brig follows shortly after, and Janeway is given her ship back. Presumably the rest of the deprogramming went just as smoothly, as everything's now back to normal. We're even going to watch a movie in Paris's theatre, and Chakotay makes it clear that Tuvok's expected. Janeway saved him a seat, primarily to ask him how he knew the gun had been rigged. The simple answer is that he didn't. He was gambling on Chakotay not giving an active weapon to somebody he didn't trust, and we leave her to contemplate what percentage probability of her death is acceptable to him as we fly away. Now I'll be honest here, kids. The frequency with which I pause videos so I can take screenshots is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it lets me pick up on details that I would have otherwise missed, but on the other, it allows me to pick up on details that I perhaps should have missed. This shot, a single frame likely to go unseen by anybody who can't stop the episode, shows a hand, and one with a high contrast between skin and fingernail. It essentially handed the reveal to me long before it should have been obvious. And yes, there's probably a conversation to be had about why there's only one person on the regular crew that it could have been, even though Voyager was better than most contemporary shows on the topic of diversity. Anyway, while seeing this so early on initially disappointed me, after thinking about it, I realized that there is a point of interest to be taken away from this. It suggests that even in the scenes where he wasn't supposed to be visible, they had Tim Russ performing, or at the very least his stand-in. That's a greater level of attention to detail than I'd have expected for what should have been a shot where he was unidentifiable. Points to whoever decided to go the extra mile. My compliments also to whoever decided on the plot in the first place. The existence of the Maquis crew has been one of Voyager's most overlooked opportunities for stories, so an exploration of it is welcome. That it ties into the now regular contact with Starfleet and the potential shit show that they're going back to is just the cherry. Chatty Blue Lad suggesting that Janeway was knocking all the Maquis out to neutralize them under orders from Starfleet Command is exactly the sort of potential friction and subplot of distrust that I think Voyager could have benefited from. There are a few problems with it, the primary one being how the activation signal was injected into an encrypted Starfleet signal by a renegade freedom fighter/terrorist. We can wave some of that away under the heading of mind control, I guess, but there are still a lot of moving parts required to make that work. And what's the point? Okay, he's an unhinged extremist, but one capable of pulling off very elaborate plans. Even he must be able to see that having one ship, some 20 years away by my count, is going to be of significantly limited use in his current struggle. Playing the long game is all well and good, but you still have to make a move before all the other players die of old age. It's also a shame that things feel so rushed at the end. This story could have benefited from being a two-parter, especially as it involves a plot point that's core to the whole concept of the show, that original duality of the ship's crew. Giving that the time for a proper send-off in the last season would have been a better option, in my opinion. What we got was still perfectly enjoyable, though, a look at the potential conflict that never really was. The speed with which both camps started working together in harmony never really gelled with me, save for a bit of disagreement between Janeway and Chakotay occasionally, which I put down to personality rather than ideology. The last gasp of Maquis Starfleet conflict we had was, Season 2? This, then, has been a long time coming, even in such a brief form. While I can't help but imagine how much more impactful this would have been if they'd spent years overcoming their differences instead of just the odd episode here and there, I think we should still be thankful that they're willing to revisit the topic in the last season at all. End of episode.
I've just heard the ship that docked with us was carrying people from a secret Starfleet intelligence unit. I can't tell you much about them, but...
Oh, you mean Section 31?
How the fuck do you know about Section 31?
Are you serious? They're about as stealthy as Neelix.
But they're supposed to be a top-secret organization.
Yeah, a top-secret organization that wears badges to identify that they're a top-secret organization. I've had shits that were less obvious. Any idea why they're here?
Well, I'm not sure, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say it might have something to do with the shapeshifter admiral we spaced a little while back.
You mean that Paris spaced as far as everyone else is concerned? Probably just as well that they think that now if it's causing this much of a stink.
Fair point. And if we're lucky, they'll turn out to be shapeshifters as well, and kill Paris for us in revenge. Woof.